Harrison Ford accidentally discovered his young, wheelchair-bound son playing with a strange little girl in the garden. He became angry and immediately forced the girl to leave the house. But just the very next day, he began to regret it. The rain had started hours ago, steady and cold, sliding down the wide windows of the Ford estate like fingers trying to get in. Harrison Ford barely noticed it. He sat behind his mahogany desk in the study upstairs, the glow of his laptop casting shadows on his sharp features. On the screen, 10 little windows showed members of the board from across the country, nodding and clicking, talking about Q4 losses, real estate shifts, and future projections. He listened, responded with low, deliberate words, checked his notes, clicked mute again. Then the security alarm buzzed, soft at first, like a fly in the ear. Emotion alert. One of the garden sensors had been triggered. Harrison paused. He turned slowly toward the monitor on the wall behind him, which flickered with a series of grainy camera feeds. At first, there was nothing but shadows and wind-whipped trees. Then, there, a flicker of movement near the east gate. Someone small, fast, barefoot. Before the board member from Chicago could finish saying, "We'll need to reassess the long-term lease on the..." Harrison cut him off. "Excuse me." He stood up, closed the laptop, and headed down the hallway toward the stairs. "Paul," he called to the head of security through the intercom. "Garden, now!" By the time Harrison reached the back patio, Paul and another guard were already outside, flashlights sweeping across the hedges. Thunder rumbled low, and the rain fell in long, icy sheets. That's when Harrison saw them, 2 figures under the tree. One was Luke, the other wasn't. Harrison's heart stalled for a breath. Luke was outside, in the storm, in his wheelchair, and he wasn't alone. "Luke!" he barked, striding forward. The boy didn't answer, didn't even flinch. He was huddled under the wide elm tree, a blanket draped over his lap, his hands wrapped tightly around a girl. She looked no older than 10. Her jeans were soaked through, torn at the knees. Her hair stuck to her face in messy blonde clumps, and her eyes were wide, locked onto Harrison's with a look that was all survival and nothing soft. Paul moved to pull her off, but Harrison raised his hand. "Wait." She held on to Luke like her life depended on it. Maybe it did. "Who the hell are you?" Harrison asked, stepping closer. "How did you get in here?" The girl didn't speak. She just tightened her grip. Her arms around Luke were skinny, sunburnt, and scraped. Luke, for his part, said nothing. His gaze stayed on his father, full of something Harrison couldn't name, something that made his chest ache. "Get her out," Harrison said, low and sharp. "Sir." Paul hesitated. "Now." The guard stepped forward, unclasped the girl's grip, which she fought fiercely at first, then suddenly let go. Silent, angry tears slid down her muddy cheeks as she backed away from Luke. She looked at him one last time, then bolted for the opening between the hedges. Luke screamed. It was the kind of sound Harrison hadn't heard from him in years, not since the accident. "No!" the boy shouted, hands beating against the arms of his wheelchair. "No! No! Bring her back!" Paul froze. Harrison didn't. He bent down and grabbed the chair's handles. "We're going inside." Luke fought him, weakly, but he fought. He hit at his father's arms, twisted his torso, kicked his legs, if you could call it that. They didn't move much anymore. Not since he was 5, not since the accident. But Harrison didn't stop. He wheeled his son inside, past the marble foyer, past the staff who peeked from behind door frames with worry etched in their brows. In the elevator, Luke was sobbing, angry and broken, whispering her name, "Lila, Lila," over and over like a chant. Harrison stood behind him, jaw clenched, soaked to the bone, unsure why the name made his stomach twist. That night, Luke didn't eat, didn't speak, didn't meet anyone's eyes, not the nurses, not his father's, not even Paul's, who brought him a small toy train from the garage as an apology of sorts. Luke simply stared out the tall window of his room, his hands resting limp in his lap, his chair angled ever so slightly toward the garden. The next day, the same, and the next. He didn't answer questions, didn't attend therapy. He refused to be bathed, brushed, dressed, just sat there, silent, absent, as if part of him had gone out with the girl in the rain. Harrison called the doctors, all of them, pediatric neurologists, child trauma specialists, therapists who charged more per hour than most people made in a week. He's not sick, they said. It's emotional. He's lost something. You mean someone? Harrison muttered under his breath. On the fourth day, Harrison sat alone in his office, sleeves rolled up, coffee cold, staring at the same damn footage over and over. The girl, Lila, slipping through the hedge like smoke. Barefoot, fast, straight toward Luke, who was waiting under the tree as if they'd planned it. But they hadn't, had they? The way Luke's face lit up, the way the girl didn't flinch at the wheelchair, didn't seem surprised or frightened. This wasn't the first time. Harrison swore softly. He leaned back, stared at the ceiling. Then he pulled up archived footage, security logs from previous weeks. Most of them were blank. The system filtered out anything not considered a threat. A squirrel, wind, a child too small to trigger the motion bar. But Harrison didn't need the system's help. He slowed the reels, watched every second, and then he saw it. A blur in the corner, 2 weeks ago. A shadow passing between bushes. Then again, 4 nights before that. A flash of movement near the fountain. And then, a tiny figure stepping through the gap in the hedge and walking barefoot toward the tree. Toward Luke. She'd been here before. Many times. Harrison leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring at the still image on the screen. The girl with tangled blonde hair and 2 thin arms, holding his son like he was something worth holding. He realized then, in the quiet hum of that midnight office, something he'd missed in the rain. The look in Luke's eyes. It hadn't been fear or surprise, just happy. Harrison leaned back, hands folded under his chin, eyes tired but not blinking. That kind of closeness didn't just happen. Luke didn't let just anyone touch him, let alone hug him. For years, the boy flinched even when Harrison brushed his shoulder to adjust a blanket. But in that footage, Luke leaned in, rested his forehead against hers, smiled. Harrison couldn't remember the last time his son smiled like that. Later that morning, after the staff had gone about their usual quiet routines, changing linens, setting vitamins beside untouched toast, Harrison went into the medical room where Luke's therapy logs were kept. They were neat, all stacked in a locked cabinet, each dated and labeled by week, kept meticulously by the nurse, Karen, who had been with them for 4 years. Harrison flipped open the most recent one and skimmed through the pages. Blood pressure, body temperature, progress charts, behavioral notes, until something caught his eye. A name, scribbled lightly in pencil in a blank margin, just under a physical therapy note. Lila brought the blue stone today. Luke says it's magic. He flipped another page. Luke told me he wants to stand up so he can walk with Lila someday. Another. Lila said today was a cloud day, so they didn't run, but they told stories instead. Luke laughed until he coughed. There were maybe a dozen of these little notations, scattered between medical updates and therapists' comments. Never officially written in, never acknowledged. Just quiet little mentions. Snippets of a world Harrison hadn't even known existed. Lila. She'd been part of Luke's life for longer than Harrison could guess. He closed the book gently, like he might damage the memory if he snapped it shut. Something in his chest was aching, heavy, unfamiliar. Not quite guilt, not yet regret, but something close to it. He went back to his office and opened the private background search portal his firm used to vet contractors and employees. He typed in the name Lila with no last name, no known address, no social security number. It was like typing into a void, but he was persistent. He called in a favor from an old acquaintance in the city's child welfare division, spoke in careful, half-curious tones. "I'm just wondering," he said, "if there's a missing persons case. A girl, maybe 9 or 10. Name could be Lila, blonde, small, probably on the streets." The woman on the phone paused, then sighed. "There are always girls like that, Mr. Ford," she said softly. "Too many." Still, she promised to check. 2 days later, she called back. "Her name might be Lila. No last name confirmed. We've had 3 separate reports over the last year. She was brought into a group home once, 6 months ago. Ran away in 2 days. The supervisor said she didn't talk much, just watched everybody. Quiet, but alert. Took a book with her when she left." Harrison closed his eyes. "Where has she been staying?" "No idea. She disappears. Some nights, someone says they saw her under the expressway bridge near Temple Street. Another time, she was seen digging through garbage outside of Mendy's diner. But by the time someone gets there, poof, gone. Like a ghost," Harrison murmured. "A smart one," the woman said. "Knows how to vanish." That night, Harrison didn't sleep. He sat in his office, watching more old camera footage. He noticed something in the way Lila moved. Fluid, quick, almost cautious, like she expected someone to yell at her any second. But when she reached Luke, her body changed, softened. Her shoulders dropped. She sat on the grass beside him, not afraid of the mud or the bugs or the cold. In one video, she placed a small stone in Luke's palm, then pointed to the sky. Luke nodded, then laughed. It was a real laugh, open-mouthed and head thrown back. Harrison hadn't seen that since the surgery. And then, something stopped him. In the next clip, clearer than the rest, Lila did something else, something that shattered him. She stood, then slowly reached for Luke's hands, helped guide them to the wheelchair's arms. She bent her knees, said something he couldn't hear, but Luke nodded. His little hands gripped the chair's sides, and with all the effort in his tiny body, he pushed himself up just an inch. Not much. But more than Harrison had seen in years of paid therapists, custom devices, and scheduled programs. Lila didn't cheer, didn't clap. She just smiled, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Harrison covered his mouth with his hand and sat back. He had to look away. All that time, he thought his son was too broken to try. But maybe it wasn't that. Maybe Luke just needed someone who didn't look at him like he was broken. By morning, the rain had returned. Soaked streets, foggy windows, puddles forming along the curbs. Harrison threw on a jacket, plain jeans, a baseball cap. Nothing designer, nothing that screamed his last name. He told Paul he was taking the day. "Just errands," he said. Then he drove. Past his usual routes, into parts of the city he hadn't touched in decades. He parked near Temple Street and walked. Past the diner, past the liquor store, past the forgotten park with 2 swings and no chains. He checked alleyways, tucked beneath old staircases, behind dumpsters, under the expressway where the concrete dripped from leaks overhead. The city was gray that morning, not just the sky, but everything. Sidewalks, street signs, old buildings with chipping paint and windows covered in plastic. Even the pigeons looked tired. Harrison moved slow through the quiet streets, like a man walking through a dream he didn't recognize, even though the address was technically still his city. Somewhere near the back alley of an old brick restaurant, Mendy's, the same one mentioned by the woman from Child Services, he saw her. She was crouched by the trash bin, arms wrapped around her knees, a black garbage bag torn open beside her. She was picking through food scraps with one hand and holding a crumpled napkin to her nose with the other. Her shoes were gone. There was duct tape wrapped around the heel of one sock. Harrison stopped. His breath caught in his throat before he even realized he was holding it. It was her. Lila. She hadn't seen him yet. She moved carefully, like someone who'd learned how to survive without being seen, not panicked, just quiet. He took one step forward, the The gravel under his foot crunched. Lila's head snapped up. Her eyes locked onto his. Then she ran. Not far. Not fast. But it was instinct. That run. Messy, panicked, limping slightly on one side. It was pure survival. She darted between two dumpsters, cutting toward the narrow passage that led behind the restaurant. "Wait!" Harrison called. "Lila!" She didn't. He followed, not running, just moving as fast as a 58-year-old man with a bad knee could manage. When he reached the alley's bend, he saw her crouched again, this time behind a stack of milk crates. She looked up at him like a stray cornered one too many times, chest heaving, mud on her cheeks. "I'm not here to hurt you," Harrison said, holding up both hands. She didn't answer. "I know you don't trust me. You probably shouldn't." Still, nothing. "I came to ask if you'd come back. Luke, he's not doing well. He misses you." Lila's eyes flickered, but she said, "You told them to take me away." "I know," he said quietly, "and I was wrong." She didn't run this time, but she didn't come any closer either. "I thought you were just some kid sneaking in, that you might hurt him or steal. I didn't know." Harrison paused. "I didn't know you meant anything to him." "I didn't steal nothing," she said, voice small, sharp like chipped glass. "I know that now." A beat of silence passed between them. "You think just 'cause you're rich and sorry I'll follow you home like some dog?" she asked. Her arms tightened around her knees. Harrison dropped to one knee, slowly. It wasn't graceful. He winced. But he stayed there, even when his leg protested. "I'm not asking you to follow me," he said. "I'm asking if you want to come back. Luke would like that. A lot." "I ain't nobody's guest," she mumbled. "You're not a guest," he said. "You're someone my son cares about. And I think you might care about him too." Lila looked away. Her lips trembled for just a second before she caught herself. "Only if no one touches me without asking," she said, voice flat. "All right," Harrison nodded. "That's fair. And no questions about where I've been. Deal. And I want my own blanket. You'll have two if you want." She stared at him for a long moment. Then, wordlessly, she stood. She didn't take his hand, but she walked with him. That was enough. Back at the estate, Paul nearly dropped the glass he was drying when he saw Harrison return with the little girl in the oversized sweatshirt. Karen blinked 3 times before saying, "I'll get her something warm." Even the house seemed to pause, its quiet halls, its polished wooden floors, as if it, too, were watching something rare. Luke had been wheeled to the sunroom that afternoon. He sat there every day now, not looking at anything, not asking for anything. The nurses said he hadn't spoken more than a few words in days, but when Lila stepped into the room, the silence cracked. He turned his head. "Lila?" She nodded once, unsure. He let out a sound, a soft, broken little laugh, and then cried. Lila didn't run to him. She walked. She knelt beside his chair, put her hand carefully on his arm, and whispered, "Told you I'd come back." He nodded, shoulders shaking, his little fingers reaching out like he didn't believe she was real. Harrison stood at the doorway and looked away. Over the next few days, the house changed. It was still the same on the outside, tall, white, quiet. But inside, the rhythm shifted. Lila didn't sleep in the guest bedroom. Not at first. She dragged a blanket into the hallway outside Luke's room and curled up there with a flashlight and a book. When Karen tried to move her, she said, "No, I want to stay near him, just in case." Harrison didn't argue. On the 3rd night, he walked past the hallway and saw them both sleeping. Luke in bed, his hand hanging over the edge, and Lila just inches away on the floor, one hand up as if she'd fallen asleep trying to hold his. Luke's therapy resumed the following week. He didn't complain like before. He didn't ask to stop. If anything, he asked for more time. more practice, especially if Lila watched. She never clapped, never fussed, never talked too much. She just sat there, same spot every day, eyes steady on him, and that was enough. Sometimes she'd say, "Don't quit now, short stuff." Other times she'd just nod, and Luke would nod back, sweat on his brow, legs trembling as he fought to stand for 5 seconds longer than yesterday. One afternoon, Harrison found Lila in the kitchen, reading the label on a cereal box. "You like that one?" he asked. "It's got marshmallows," she said, still reading. "Then it's a good one." She set it down, finally looked at him. "You don't talk to Luke like before." "What do you mean?" "You used to ask if he took his pills or did his stretches. Now you ask if he's happy." Harrison smiled, a little surprised. "You noticed that?" "Yeah." He poured himself a coffee, sat across from her at the table. She didn't run this time, didn't flinch, just kept reading the back of the box like it was a newspaper. "You know," he said, "you're pretty good at this." "At what?" "Making people feel seen." She didn't answer, but she smiled, just a little. That night, as he walked past the open door to Luke's room, Harrison heard the boy say softly, "You think I'll walk someday?" "Don't need to," Lila answered. "You already stand taller than most folks I know." The sun didn't always reach the back rooms of the house, not in the early mornings. The light came in filtered through thick drapes and tall windows, spilling soft and golden across hardwood floors. But lately, since Lila had come back, there seemed to be more of it, like the house itself was waking up from something. She slept on the living room sofa with a wool blanket tucked under her chin, one leg always dangling over the side. She didn't say if she was comfortable. She didn't ask for a room. She just curled up there like it was enough, like being inside with walls and heat was already more than she'd ever expected. Karen brought her warm socks, folded neatly at the edge of the couch each morning. Lila never said thank you, but she wore them. Luke insisted she sit next to him at breakfast. Not always close, but close enough. He'd slide the butter dish her way, or tilt his cereal bowl to show her the marshmallow he fished out, and she'd just nod, sometimes grin, and keep chewing her toast. Harrison watched them, most mornings in silence. He'd stir his coffee longer than necessary, using the time to figure out what this new rhythm meant. The quiet in the house had changed. It wasn't hollow anymore. It was full of something unspoken, like the hush of a chapel. Lila didn't talk much about herself, where she came from, how long she'd been on the street, what had happened before the garden, before Luke. She spoke like someone who knew too well that words could be stolen. So instead, she listened. And the way she listened made it feel like she'd already been there for years. Luke seemed to understand the silence in her. He never pried, never pushed. He just brought her into his little world like she was always meant to be part of it. That Sunday, after his therapy session, Luke rolled his chair up next to Harrison on the porch, squinting against the afternoon light. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy?" Luke hesitated. His fingers fidgeted along the armrest of his chair. "Can Lila stay? Like, always?" The words were simple, but they hit Harrison right in the chest. He didn't answer right away. He looked out over the yard instead, where Lila was crouched in the grass, watching a line of ants carry crumbs from the patio. He'd known this question would come. He just hadn't known how much it would shake him. "She doesn't have a family," Luke said, softer now. "But we could be one." Harrison's mouth felt dry. He cleared his throat, leaned forward. "It's not that simple, Luke." "Why not?" "Because," Harrison sighed, "there are rules about where kids are supposed to live, who's allowed to take care of them, and she doesn't have papers, a birth certificate, anything." Luke was quiet for a long moment. "So?" Harrison looked at him then, his son, thin, pale, legs unmoving, eyes full of more hope than any kid should be allowed to carry alone. "So," Harrison said gently, "people could say I'm not allowed to keep her here, that I'm doing something wrong." "But you're not," Luke said, his voice sharp now, almost trembling. "You're helping her. I know. Then why do people care?" Harrison didn't have an answer. Not one a 10-year-old could understand. Maybe not even one he understood himself. That night, as Harrison flipped through news on his tablet, a headline stopped him cold. "City billionaire seen escorting homeless child, charity or cover-up." He clicked. There, in grainy, zoomed-in photos, were images of him and Lila walking side by side down Temple Street. One showed him handing her a water bottle. Another caught her ducking behind him as a car passed. The article didn't name her. It just called her a street child and referred to Harrison as a man with a long history of tight public image control. The tone was cutting, careful but full of implication. Whispers of scandal, accusations of recklessness. He set the tablet down with a heavy thud. Within the hour, his phone lit up with a call from his assistant, Michael. "You've seen it?" "I have. There's a lot of buzz online. PR's already panicking. Some of the board members are demanding a statement." "Let them." "Sir, if I may, this is dangerous ground. If that girl has no guardian, no ID, technically, you're housing a runaway. We could be talking about legal repercussions, CPS, law enforcement." "I'm not putting her out." Michael hesitated. "Then we need to figure something out. Quietly. Before this explodes." Harrison didn't sleep that night. He stood at the window in the hallway outside Luke's room, watching the silhouettes of both children. Luke tucked under blankets, Lila curled up on the rug beside the bed, her hand resting near his. He thought of everything he'd built, his company, his estate, his reputation. Then he thought of Luke's laugh, that first one after weeks of silence. He thought of Lila's calm eyes as she told his son he already stood tall. And for the first time in decades, Harrison Ford made a decision that had nothing to do with profit, legacy, or how things looked on paper. The next morning, he went down to his office, opened his computer, and searched how to adopt an undocumented child in the U.S. He didn't even know where to begin. The legal websites were a maze. Terms like special circumstances, guardianship petitions, foster placement exceptions. It felt like falling into a pool with no ladder out. But still, he printed the forms. He read every word. The manila folder on Harrison's desk grew thicker by the day. Inside it, loose pages curled at the corners, printouts from adoption law sites, handwritten notes from phone calls, yellow sticky tabs poking out like warning flags. He'd filled it with everything he thought he might need. Proof of Lila's presence in his care. Notes from Karen. Statements from Luke's therapist describing the girl's impact on his emotional progress. Even a photograph, a candid one, of Lila and Luke sitting on the back steps, their shoulders nearly touching, both of them laughing at something only they understood. But when he met with his attorney, Charles Weller, in the quiet conference room overlooking the river, he realized how little paper really weighed in matters of the heart. "There's something you need to know," Charles said, resting both hands over a file of his own. "Even if the court finds you fit to adopt, if any biological relative comes forward, they have a legal right to contest custody, especially if they claim blood relation and present themselves as willing to provide care." Harrison frowned. "She has no family. She told us that herself." Charles exhaled slowly. "That's what you believe. But the law doesn't run on belief. It runs on names, documents, claims. She doesn't know her last name, doesn't even have a birth certificate. She was born somewhere," Charles said gently. "To someone." Harrison sat back in his chair. His fingers tapped against the leather armrest. He hadn't come this far just to be undone by someone who hadn't lifted a hand to Lila in years, if ever. "What if no one comes forward?" he asked. Charles shrugged slightly. "Then we move forward. But if someone does? Then we fight." It didn't take long. Barely a week after Harrison submitted the first round of documents, a woman appeared at the Department of Family Services downtown. She said her name was Miriam Alvarez, and she claimed to be the sister of Lila's mother. She had copies of old photographs, faded, but intact. One showed two girls, no older than teenagers, grinning beside a birthday cake. The second was of a woman holding a newborn in a hospital gown. Miriam pointed herself out in the background. She said she had only recently learned her niece was alive, that the girl's mother had lived in a different city, had fallen on hard times, and never spoke of her personal life. "I didn't even know my sister passed," Miriam said. "Not until her old landlord contacted me looking for next of kin. When pressed, she admitted she'd never met Lila in person, never held her, never sent a card, but she insisted she had the right to care for her now. Family should stay with family," she said. When Harrison was informed of Miriam's claim, he sat still for a long time. The air in the house felt heavier that day. Lila was in the sunroom, humming to herself as she helped Luke piece together a jigsaw puzzle of a mountain range neither of them had ever seen. He didn't want to tell her. Not yet. Not until he understood exactly what they were dealing with. But the decision wasn't his. A court summons arrived 2 days later. Preliminary custody review. Child in question. Lila. Temporary guardian. Harrison Ford. The name wasn't even hers. Not legally. Just a name she used, given or chosen. No one knew. The night before the hearing, Harrison sat Lila and Luke down at the dinner table. Neither child was eating much. The air between them was full of something too heavy for their small frames. "There's something I need to tell you," Harrison said quietly. Lila looked up from her untouched plate. Luke froze mid-bite. A woman came forward. "Says she might be your aunt, Lila." Lila blinked. "What?" "She says she's your mother's sister." "No." The word came out sharp, too quick. "I don't have an aunt." "She showed photos, claimed she only found out about you recently." "She's lying." Harrison didn't respond right away. "I don't know what the truth is yet. That's what the court wants to figure out. But until then, you'll stay here, with me. Social services will check in, but you won't be going anywhere unless the court says so." Lila pushed her chair back suddenly. "I don't know her," she said. "I don't care who she is. She might be family." "I have a family." Her voice cracked. "You and Luke. That's it." Luke reached across the table and grabbed her sleeve. "You're not going anywhere." Lila's eyes burned. She yanked her arm free and left the room without another word. Later, Harrison found her curled up in her usual corner on the hallway rug, her face half buried in the blanket Karen had given her. He sat beside her, not too close. "I'm sorry," he said. "I wish I could make it go away." "You can't," she mumbled. "I won't let anyone take you without a fight. You hear me?" Lila didn't answer, but her hand crept just slightly toward his, not enough to touch, but enough to be near. That night, Luke insisted they all sleep in his room. So they did. Luke in his bed, Lila on her mat, and Harrison in the chair by the window, his heart too loud to sleep. The court hearing was brief, stiff, clinical. Miriam was polite, well-spoken, modest in dress. She told the judge about her 2 grown children, her steady work cleaning houses in El Paso, her desire to give her niece a proper home surrounded by blood. She didn't mention never trying to contact Lila before. She didn't mention the years of silence. Lila didn't say a word in the courtroom, but when asked directly if she knew the woman claiming to be her aunt, she shook her head. "I never seen her," she said. "My mom never said anything." Miriam flinched, but kept her face smooth. Harrison stood when it was his turn. He didn't use legal terms. He didn't read from notes. He just told the truth. "I didn't plan to find her, but I did. And now she's part of a family, maybe not by blood, but in every other way that matters." The judge didn't issue a ruling. She called for further documentation, interviews, evaluations. A decision would take time. For now, Lila was to remain in Harrison's care, under supervision, under watch. The days after the hearing passed like heavy fog, thick, quiet, hard to see through. Harrison went about his schedule as if someone had placed a weight on his back, just heavy enough to notice, never light enough to ignore. Lila didn't talk much after the court date. Not even to Luke. She still sat beside him for breakfast, still passed him the milk, still chuckled when he made a mess of his cereal. But her smile never quite reached her eyes. Luke noticed. He noticed everything. Karen told Harrison that Lila had started waking up in the middle of the night, sweaty, wide-eyed, sitting straight up on the couch like she was waiting for someone to grab her. When asked what was wrong, she just shook her head and said she was fine. She wasn't. Neither was Luke. He started refusing his physical therapy sessions again, told Karen his legs were tired, told Harrison he didn't want to try anymore, told Lila. Nothing. He just turned his face to the wall when she came in the room. And the truth was, Harrison didn't blame them. He felt the cracks forming too, because outside their fragile bubble the world was stirring, and it had teeth. The first article hit 2 days after the hearing. A local paper, headline bold and unforgiving. Billionaire CEO, savior or storyteller? The piece featured quotes from Miriam, now introduced as the long-lost aunt fighting to reclaim her niece from corporate exploitation. She spoke carefully but clearly, said she had concerns about Harrison's motivations, wondered aloud whether he was using the child for image management. Maso asked why a man with no parental record and so much to gain from public sympathy had inserted himself so deeply into a situation that should have remained a private family matter. Harrison read it in silence. By the end of the week, 3 more news outlets had picked up the story. Cable news anchors started calling. Tabloids dug up old photos of Harrison from his wilder days. Gala events, champagne, different women on his arm. Then Miriam made her TV appearance. She sat on a morning talk show, hands folded primly in her lap, and said the words that turned the tide. "I'm just worried about my niece. She's a little girl. She needs stability, she needs love, not to be the centerpiece of someone's charitable campaign." It was carefully crafted. She never accused him directly, but she didn't have to. The public turned quick. Online comments piled up like storm clouds, some calling Harrison a hero, others calling him a fraud. His company's board called an emergency meeting and politely suggested he step back for a while, at least until the legal process sorts itself out. Stockholders worried about optics. PR consultants offered him scripts to read if cornered by reporters. He ignored all of them. Instead, he picked up the phone and hired a private investigator. The man was older, discreet, used to rich clients and family secrets. He didn't ask many questions, just nodded, scribbled down Miriam's name and said, "Give me a few days." When the results came back, Harrison sat alone in his study and read every word. It turned out Miriam wasn't the saint she painted herself to be. In 2013, she'd been investigated for child neglect after one of her sons, age 9, was found wandering alone in a parking lot past midnight. She claimed she'd fallen asleep after working 2 jobs. No charges were filed. In 2017, a neighbor filed a complaint alleging verbal abuse and suspected physical punishment. Again, nothing stuck. Not enough evidence. Harrison stared at the report, heart thudding slow and heavy. She was no savior, but she knew how to sell the part. The next day, another article dropped, this time quoting Miriam as saying she refused to speak ill of Mr. Ford, but hoped the system would protect Lila from becoming a pawn in anyone's personal redemption arc. Lila found the article by accident. She wasn't supposed to be using Harrison's tablet, but it had been left on the kitchen table, and curiosity is a strong thing in children, especially the ones who've learned to read between the lines of grown-up silence. She read every word, then read it again. That night, she didn't touch her dinner. Luke tried to show her a drawing he made, a dog with a cape flying through the sky, but she just nodded without looking. "You mad?" he asked. She shook her head. "You sad?" Still no answer. That night, Harrison found her in the mudroom, stuffing a water bottle and 2 granola bars into her backpack. "Where you going?" he asked, his voice low. She didn't answer, just zipped the bag tight. "You don't have to run." "I'm not running," she whispered. "Then what are you doing?" "I'm leaving," she said, her back still to him. "I messed everything up." "No, you didn't." "Yes, I did." She turned then, and her face was pale, tear-streaked. "They're saying bad stuff about you. Luke's not talking again. People at the store looked at me like I stole something. I'm the reason all this is happening." Harrison walked over slowly, knelt down so they were eye to eye. "Lila," he said, "none of this is your fault." "But it is," she choked out. "Before I came, Luke was getting better. Now he's not. And you were. Respected. Now you're not. People hate you." "I don't care what people think." "You should." He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "You're not a burden," he said. "You're the reason I get up in the morning. You and Luke both. This house didn't mean anything before you came. It was just quiet and full of things that didn't matter." Her lip trembled. "But if I stay, it gets worse." "No. If you leave, that's when it gets worse." Lila stared at him, torn wide open. And then, like a dam breaking, she crumpled forward into his chest, sobbing in great, shuddering gasps. Harrison wrapped his arms around her like he'd been waiting to do it his whole life, held her close and strong and steady. After a long moment, she whispered against his shirt, "Dad." He closed his eyes. That one word, small, uncertain, full of all the things she'd never had, hit him harder than any threat, any lawsuit, any headline. The courthouse didn't look like much, just a gray building tucked between a tired post office and a faded brick church. But on the morning of the hearing, it loomed large in Harrison's mind, like a mountain he hadn't trained to climb. The kind of place where strangers decided the fate of people who'd already become family. He pulled the car into the lot and parked near the back. The sun had barely broken through the clouds, casting a pale morning light across the cracked pavement. Luke sat in the back seat, quiet, knees tucked under the folded blanket Lila had laid over him that morning. His face was pale, his eyes too big for someone his age. Lila sat beside him, hair combed and pinned back, not by request, but because she wanted to look proper. She wore the blue sweater Karen had found in an old donation box, sleeves a little too long, collar stitched back together by hand. Harrison turned to them before they got out. "You two ready?" he asked, voice low. Luke nodded. Lila didn't, but she opened the door. Inside, the courthouse felt like a doctor's office that forgot how to be comforting. Fluorescent lights, worn carpet, the faint smell of paper and metal. Harrison checked in with the clerk and waited on a bench outside the family court chamber, his heart beating in his throat. He held a leather folder in his lap. Inside were copies of every document Charles had told him to prepare. Luke's medical evaluations, progress reports from physical therapy, a letter from the therapist, photos of Lila helping him, a short video of Luke standing for 10 full seconds with her encouragement, a handwritten letter from Luke himself, printed in clumsy, careful block letters. "She's my sister even if we don't got the same name. She helped me be brave. I want her to stay. I love her." Harrison had added his own letter too, short, honest, written late one night with a coffee-stained pen. "I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for the court to see what I see. A child who came into our lives like sunlight through dirty windows, who taught me how to be a father, who belongs with us, because she chose us, and we chose her." When their case was called, the courtroom wasn't dramatic like TV. No gavel, no yelling, just a few rows of seats, a judge in plain robes, and the hush of heavy air. Miriam was already there, dressed in dark green, her hair neatly tied back. She nodded at the judge, then gave Harrison a tight, unreadable look. The judge spoke gently, asked both parties to present their case. Miriam went first. Her voice was steady. She explained again that she was Lila's aunt, that she had only recently learned the girl was still alive, that she had a modest but stable life, a 2-bedroom rental in El Paso, grown children with jobs, a small church community. She said she wanted to do right by her sister's child. "She's blood," Miriam said, hands folded in front of her. "And blood matters." Then carefully she shifted her tone. Her eyes moved to Harrison. "I'm not saying Mr. Ford means harm. I'm sure he's done kind things, but he's a businessman, a public figure, one who's recently been the focus of news coverage. My concern is that this child is being used to soften his image. I believe children should be raised in homes, not headlines." Harrison didn't move, but he felt the heat rise in his face. The judge turned to him. "Mr. Ford?" He stood slowly, held the folder tight. "I don't know much about what makes a perfect home," he said. "I didn't grow up with one. I've made more mistakes in my life than I can count. But a few months ago, a little girl wandered into my garden, soaking wet, no shoes, and she changed everything." He glanced at Lila, sitting quietly beside Luke, hands knotted in her lap. "She gave my son something none of us could. Hope. Not the kind in textbooks or therapy sessions. Real hope. She made him want to try again. She made me want to try again. Not as a businessman, not as a public figure. Just as a man trying to build something real for the first time in a long time." He handed the folder to the clerk, sat down. The judge nodded. "Thank you." Then her eyes landed on Lila. The room went still. "Lila," the judge said softly, "do you want to speak?" Lila swallowed. Harrison saw her fingers tremble slightly, then still. She stood. "I don't know that lady," she said, motioning toward Miriam. "I never heard her name before." Miriam shifted but said nothing. "She says she's my aunt, but my mama never talked about her. I don't remember no family." She looked at Harrison. "But I remember who found me, who let me stay, who made soup when I was sick and told me I was worth something, who sat with me when I had bad dreams." She took a breath. Her voice grew firmer. "Luke needs me, and I need him. And Mr. Harrison, he's not a pretend dad. He's my dad, the real kind, even if we don't got the same blood." The judge nodded once. "Thank you, Lila. You may sit." She did, gently. Luke reached out and grabbed her hand under the table. The decision didn't come quickly. The judge said more assessments were needed, more paperwork, but she granted Harrison temporary guardianship pending the court's final ruling. Lila would remain in his care, with conditions, supervision, scheduled visits. When the judge adjourned, Miriam stood slowly, gathering her coat. She looked at Lila again, but this time, there was something else in her eyes, something softer, maybe not regret, but something near it. "I hope you're good to her," she said quietly to Harrison as they passed in the hallway. "I already am." Miriam didn't argue. She just nodded, then walked away. Outside the courthouse, the sun had come out, clean and bright, scattering light across the parking lot. Harrison held the car door open while Lila helped Luke into the back seat. For a moment, they stood side by side, two children who weren't supposed to find each other, and a man who had never meant to be their father. No fanfare, no tears at the door, just the sound of zippers, footsteps, and a nervous breath or two echoing down the long hallway of Westfield Elementary. It wasn't Lila's first school, but it felt like it. And maybe, in a way, it was, because this time, someone was waiting for her to come home. Karen had packed her a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, and a little note written in careful script. "Have a good day. Luke says don't forget to smile." Lila didn't say much that morning. She wore the same navy blue hoodie she'd worn to court, sleeves still a bit long, hair tied back in a small ponytail with a rubber band she'd found in a drawer. She held her backpack close the whole drive there, like she expected someone might try to take it. "You okay?" Harrison asked gently as they pulled into the school lot. I guess, she said. He reached over and squeezed her shoulder, just once. Come home proud. That's all I ask. She didn't answer, but she nodded, and that was enough. The first week passed slow. Lila sat near the back of every classroom, didn't raise her hand, didn't join in games at recess. Kids noticed her, but they didn't point or stare. Most just left her alone. She was a quiet kind of different, not loud or odd, just far away, like a book closed too tight. But in art class, something changed. The teacher, Miss Rayner, was older, the kind of woman who wore chunky necklaces made from seashells and spoke like every child had a secret worth discovering. On the third day, she handed out blank sheets of thick paper and a basket of colored pencils. Today, draw something that feels like home, she said. Most kids drew houses, trees, pets. Lila drew a pair of hands, one large, calloused, with a scar on the knuckle, one smaller, wrapped around the other. Behind them was a kitchen table, a chipped mug, and a window with rain on the glass. Miss Rayner stood behind her for a long time, saying nothing. When the bell rang, she touched Lila's shoulder and said, "That's real art, sweetheart. You just told a story without saying a word." Lila didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. That night, Harrison sat reading at the kitchen table, while Luke wheeled himself back and forth in small circles, practicing a new turn. Lila laid her sketchbook on the counter without a word. He flipped it open. There were drawings of Luke laughing, of Harrison holding a frying pan with an apron that said, "Bad at math, great at pancakes," of the backyard at sunset. One picture showed the three of them sitting under a tree, legs stretched, heads tilted toward each other like flowers chasing the same light. "These are yours?" Harrison asked. Lila shrugged. "Just something from school." "Lila," he said, his voice softer now. "These are beautiful." She shifted on her feet. "Miss Rayner says I'm good." "She's right." He turned another page and paused. There, drawn in charcoal and soft pencil, was the moment Luke had stood. His hands on the chair's edge, Lila crouched beside him, eyes wide, mouth open, as if whispering something only the two of them could hear. Luke's therapy took on new life. Whether it was Lila's quiet presence or something deeper, something only he could explain, he began pushing harder. One step became two became four. On the last Thursday of the month, during a family session, something happened no one expected. Luke stood. Not for a second, not with help. He stood, straight. Then, slowly, awkwardly, like a baby bird testing new wings, he took a step forward. Then another. He stumbled at the third, and Harrison caught him just before he fell. Everyone froze. Then, Lila, crouched beside him, whispered with a grin, "Told you. You can fly without wings." They went to the park that Saturday. Not far, just a little one near the edge of town with cracked pavement and two rusty swings. Harrison brought ice cream in a cooler bag, which melted a little too fast in the sun. They sat beneath a yellow street lamp as dusk settled in, orange light pooling on their laps like warm syrup. Lila sat on the bench between the two of them, legs tucked under, her cone already half gone. After a while, she asked, "Are you sure I'm not a burden?" Harrison didn't answer right away. He wiped a drip from Luke's chin, then looked at her. "From the day you came here," he said, "I've known one thing for sure." She turned to him. "This house was just a house before you. You didn't make things worse, Lila. You made things matter." He reached his arm around both kids, pulled them close. "You're not a burden," he whispered. "You're the reason I finally understand what home means." She didn't cry. Not right then. She just leaned into him, resting her head on his side, and let the silence fill with something warm. 2 weeks later, Lila handed Miss Rayner a folded sheet of paper. It was a poem. Short, scribbled in pencil. Her first. "The unlocked door. I walked through a door no one locked. I thought they'd send me back, but the man gave me soup. and the boy smiled like he'd waited for me. There was no, "Why are you here?" Just a chair and a story and a place to sit. That's how I knew. I wasn't a visitor. I was home. Miss Rayner read it once, then again. She pressed her hand to her chest and whispered, "You are a writer, child. Don't you ever stop." Lila didn't believe her. Not fully. But she smiled all the same. Because for the first time, someone saw her not as a case or a stray or a second chance. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning. It came in a plain white packet. No fuss or flourish, just Harrison's name typed neatly above the address. Karen brought it in with the rest of the morning mail and laid it gently on the kitchen table beside his coffee mug. He stared at it for a while before opening it. No need for a letter opener. His hands weren't shaking, but they weren't exactly steady either. He slid his thumb under the seal and pulled out the paper inside. There, in official lettering, with the seal of the state embossed in the bottom corner, it read, "Final Decree of Adoption. Child, Lila Ford. Adoptive parent, Harrison James Ford." His eyes paused on the name, Lila Ford. He read it again, then folded the paper once, careful and neat, and slipped it back into the envelope like something sacred. She was out back with Luke when he came to find her. They were sitting in the shade of the old oak tree, Lila's sketch pad in her lap, Luke watching her draw a lopsided squirrel with a knight's helmet. Harrison stepped onto the porch and cleared his throat softly. "Lila," he called, "got something for you." She looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. He walked down the steps and handed her the envelope without a word. She took it slow, wary at first. Then her eyes landed on the name. She didn't cry. That wasn't her way. She just gripped the paper tight and whispered, "Now I can write my name in the family too." Luke leaned over to see. His mouth opened in a silent, "Whoa." Then he smiled so big it made his cheeks hurt. "You're one of us now," he said. "I always was," she answered, but her voice was softer than usual. "Now it's just on paper." That night, after dinner, Lila took a small piece of tape and stuck the certificate to the wall beside her favorite drawing, the one of her, Luke, and Harrison, sitting under the tree, legs tangled, faces turned to the same light. Luke grabbed a marker and wrote underneath in his blocky handwriting, "She's the missing piece." Then, without a word, he handed the marker to Harrison. Harrison hesitated. "I don't want to ruin it." "You won't," Lila said, looking at him. "You helped make it." He thought for a moment, then carefully wrote, "Now whole." That night, they ate ice cream for dinner. Karen didn't scold them. She even had a bowl herself. A week later, Lila was called to the front of the school assembly to read a piece of writing she'd submitted for Voices of the Year, a tradition where one student from each grade shared a story that had made an impact on a teacher. She stood on the small stage in front of 200 students and staff, her knees locked, her hands gripping a crumpled piece of paper. Miss Rayner stood just off stage, mouthing the first line like a safety net. Lila took a breath and began. "When I was little, I didn't have a name that stayed. People called me kid, girl, hey you. Some folks didn't call me anything. They just looked past me like I wasn't there." She looked up. The room was quiet. "I used to think names were for people who mattered. You know, folks with houses, with mailboxes, with someone waiting on the other side of a locked door." She unfolded the bottom of her paper. "But then one day, a man opened a door and didn't ask questions, and a boy let me sit beside him without asking who I was. And that was the day I learned. Love don't wait on papers." A few kids shifted in their seats. Some teachers dabbed their eyes. "I got adopted last week. My name is Lila Ford now, and that means more to me than most things, because it means somebody chose me. Somebody kept me." She swallowed hard. "I still draw. I still have dreams where I think I'm running again, but when I wake up, I remember I don't have to run no more." She looked over at Miss Rayner. "Thank you for seeing me, and thank you to my family for keeping me." The applause was soft at first. Then it grew. The whole auditorium stood, and Miss Rayner cried. Back home that night, Harrison sat at the kitchen table with a small wooden box in front of him. It was old, with a tiny brass latch that didn't quite close all the way. Inside were scraps of folded paper, Lila's first notes from the early days, torn napkins, doodled backs of receipts, little cards she'd slipped under his door. "Sorry," I yelled. "I can help with Luke if you want." "Do I have to go back out?" "Thank you for the cereal." Each one like a breadcrumb from the start of something he hadn't known how much he'd needed. He added one more to the box that night, a fresh copy of the adoption certificate, folded carefully beside her first poem. On the lid, he taped a small handwritten label, proof that love doesn't need to come on time, just to the right place. He set the box in his drawer and closed it slowly. Outside, Lila was lying in the hammock beside Luke. The stars were just beginning to peek out from the edges of dusk, and the crickets were tuning up for their nightly chorus. "You ever think about your real dad?" Luke asked, not looking at her. Lila was quiet for a moment. "Not really," she said. "He never looked for me. But I think about the one who found me." Luke turned to her. "That's better." "Yeah," she whispered, eyes fixed on the sky. "It is." Harrison stepped outside just in time to hear the end of it. He didn't say anything, just sat down on the porch steps and listened to them breathing, quiet and steady. That was the thing about family, he thought. It didn't always come how you expected, didn't always come with blood or names you recognized. The grass was still damp from the morning dew, but Luke didn't seem to mind. He wheeled himself forward across the open field just outside of town, arms steady, eyes fixed on the horizon like he was chasing something only he could see. Lila jogged beside him, not too fast, not too slow, just enough to match his pace. Every now and then, she'd toss a grin over her shoulder and call out, "You're gaining on me, slowpoke." And Luke would laugh loud enough to startle the birds out of the nearby trees. Harrison trailed behind with a checkered picnic blanket rolled under one arm, a bag of food in the other, and 2 books stuffed under his jacket. He wasn't in a hurry. Watching them was better than anything those books could offer. This was the kind of scene he'd once thought only existed in someone else's life. Something from a commercial or a magazine ad selling something too perfect to be real. But here it was, real as dirt and sunlight. They stopped near an old elm tree, the one with a crooked trunk that leaned just enough to cast a wide patch of shade. Harrison laid the blanket down, smoothed out the corners, and dropped the basket in the center. Lila flopped onto her back, arms spread wide. "We're the weirdest family here." Harrison sat beside her, letting his old knees complain a little. "Weird?" She rolled onto her side and smirked. "Yeah, you in your sweater vest, Luke in a wheelchair doing laps like he's training for a marathon, and me, barefoot, as usual." He chuckled. "We may be weird, but we're exactly right. Kinda like scrambled eggs and jelly toast," Luke added, sliding onto the edge of the blanket. Harrison raised a brow. "That doesn't even make sense." Lila shrugged. "It does to us." And it did. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and Luke had gone to bed, Harrison stood in the living room with a hammer in hand and a frame tucked under his arm. The frame wasn't new. It was a bit scuffed on the corners, and the glass had been replaced once after a mishap involving a soccer ball and a hallway with poor supervision. But inside, it was something more permanent. A drawing, signed in the corner by Lila, of the 3 of them standing under the elm tree. Harrison's hair was wilder in the sketch than in real life. Luke's smile was wider. Lila had drawn herself holding a book with pages flying like birds. He hung the frame in the center of the living room wall, above the fireplace, where it caught the morning light just right. Below it, he placed a small wooden box. Inside were Lila's first pair of shoes, the ones she'd come in wearing, laces frayed, toes nearly worn through. She hadn't worn them in months, but she hadn't let go of them either. When she came into the room and saw it, she stood there for a long time. "You kept them?" "Of course I did," Harrison said. They brought you here." She touched the toe of one gently. "They're not pretty. They're perfect," he said. She didn't speak again, just leaned her head against his side and stayed there for a while. A week later, rain came, soft, steady, and just cold enough to make the windows fog. Luke sat at the window, watching the drops chase each other down the glass. Harrison sat across from him, sipping coffee. "Did you ever worry I'd never walk again?" Luke asked suddenly, not looking away from the rain. Harrison took a slow breath. "Every day." "Did it scare you?" "More than I've ever been scared of anything." Luke turned his head then. "What about being alone?" Harrison paused. His eyes moved to the hallway where Lila's laughter echoed faintly from the kitchen. "I used to be more afraid of that than anything else," he said. "Being surrounded by things but not people. But now, I've got 2 walking miracles under my roof. Even if one of you's still learning to walk." Luke smiled. "I think I'm more scared of losing what we have than not walking." Harrison reached over, placed his hand over Luke's. "You're not going to lose it. Not now. Not ever." That Friday, Lila printed out the final pages of her short story. She smoothed them down, read it 3 times, and then tucked it into a manila envelope. She wrote the title on the front in her best cursive, "The Girl Without a Home and the Man Who Forgot How to Smile." It wasn't a fairy tale. Not really. The story began in the rain, with hunger and fear. It had no princes, no glass slippers, no magic wands. But it had second chances, and soup, and the warmth of someone calling you by your name like it meant something. She walked into the living room and handed it to Harrison. "I want to send it to a publisher." He blinked, caught off guard. "You mean like a real one?" "Yeah, for the kids who don't know they're allowed to belong yet." He took the envelope from her and held it like it was something fragile and precious. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's ours," she replied. Luke wheeled in a minute later, saw the envelope, and grinned. "Is that your story?" She nodded. "Can I write the sequel?" he joked. "The Boy Who Flew Without Wings?" Harrison laughed, and Lila ruffled his hair. "Only if I get to do the cover art." That night, as the sky turned soft with dusk and the porch light hummed overhead, the 3 of them sat in quiet. No big plans, no rush, just the sound of rain softening, a kettle warming inside, and the kind of silence that only families who've been through storms know how to enjoy. They weren't rich by the world's measure. No magazine would feature their odd little house, or their hand-drawn wall art, or the shoes with torn laces in a box by the fireplace. But they had a name for each other. They had memories and stories, and a home built on purpose. And in the quiet, Harrison whispered something he'd never thought he'd say, not because he didn't believe it, but because he hadn't known how much it mattered. "We're not missing anything." Lila looked over, and Luke nodded. They weren't. Because sometimes, being rich just means not having to wish for anything else. This story is a quiet, emotional journey about healing, love, and the unexpected ways a family can form, not by blood, but by choice. What makes the characters so unforgettable is how deeply human they are. Harrison, a man once hardened by loneliness and routine, slowly learns how to love with both hands open. Lila, a resilient young girl scarred by abandonment, finds the courage to trust, to hope, and finally, to belong. And Luke, though physically limited, is emotionally strong, his heart wide enough to hold them both. Their journey isn't dramatic in the usual sense. It's not filled with action, but with quiet, powerful moments. A meal shared, a picture drawn, a name finally claimed. These moments show how love often grows in the small things, and how family is something you build, not something you're born into. The most profound lesson is that love doesn't need perfect timing or even perfect people. It only needs someone willing to stay. In a world that often rushes past the broken, this story reminds us that sometimes choosing to stay, to listen, to care, that's what saves us. And in that, There is a wealth deeper than anything money could ever buy. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way.